Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio,
Tumwa, Iowa.
Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. President-elect Trump is already threatening journalists and pushing congressional Republicans to kill a law that would protect journalists and their sources. This is very, very important. Obviously, I don't have a very high opinion of the corporate media, but what Trump is doing and trying to do would also affect independent journalists and the few independent journalists we have out there that actually do investigative reporting, like yours truly. Super alarming what's going on. This is from the New York Times. Trump tells Republicans to kill reporter shield bill passed unanimously by the House. The bill, known as the Press Act, would codify protections against federal investigators seizing reporters' records. It is now less likely the legislation will clear the Senate before the current session ends. I'll read a little bit of this. President-elect Trump on Wednesday instructed congressional Republicans to block the passage of bipartisan federal shield bill intended to strengthen the ability of reporters to protect confidential sources, dealing a potentially fatal political blow to the measure, even though the Republican-controlled House has already passed it unanimously. The call by Trump makes it less likely that the bill to protect reporters from exploitive state spying act or Press Act will reach the Senate floor and be passed before the current session of Congress ends next month. Even one senator could hold up the bill, chewing up many hours of Senate floor time that could be spent on confirming judges or passing other legislation deemed to be a higher priority. Trump issued the edict on a post on his Truth Social platform Wednesday afternoon, citing a PBS NewsHour report about the federal shield legislation. He wrote, "Republicans must kill this bill," in all caps. So let me give you a little background here. And again, you might say, well, Jordan, the mainstream media is awful. And some of you might say Trump has a point. Okay, let's put aside the fake news stuff, because Trump basically calls anything fake news that is critical or reveals his corruption. Sorry if you're MAGA watching. Fake news, yeah, there is propaganda out there. There is a lot of horrible corporate spin out there. There is a lot of reporting that ends up being inaccurate. There's a lot of propaganda that leads us to wars, this and that. However, there is also good reporting out there, even in times, at times from mainstream media outlets, and a lot of times from independent outlets. So, for example, as you guys know, if you watch Status Coup, I recently published my first book called We the Poisoned, exposing the Flint water cover-up and the poisoning of 100,000 Americans. This book, which is out now, so get it before the holiday times for you and your loved ones, if you choose. It's out there on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's an audio version on Audible. This book is based on 8 years of my reporting. It's based on thousands of confidential documents I obtained from the Flint criminal investigation. Now, as of now, my sources are protected. The different states have shield laws, and shield laws are meant to protect reporters and their sources. Now, some states' shield laws are better for reporters and sources. Some states' shield laws are looser and not as good for reporters and their sources. But the shield law, it's supposed to protect a reporter, protect a reporter's property, devices, any physical or digital manifestations that would identify their sources. So right now, in most states, you can't just go, a court can't just heavy-handedly, send in the troops to seize my computer or my devices, or which would have documents on it and might be able to trace sources. What Trump wants to do is kill all that. He wants to kill this bill that would further protect and provide federal shield law protection, so that if I'm doing further reporting on Flint or East Palestine or name your corporate sacrifice zone, that my devices or my communications with officials might be subject to, the federal government coming in and seizing them. If you remember Stephen Donziger, the environmental attorney who went after Big Oil, and in return, Big Oil went on a holy crusade against him. Chevron spent, millions and millions of dollars, railroading him, and he was under house arrest for years and then actually prison for years because he would not give up his confidential attorney-client communications with his clients, the Ecuadorian people who were poisoned by Chevron in the Amazon in Ecuador. Well, Stephen Donziger would not give up his devices, which held his private confidential communications. That those devices were protected or should have been protected by the SHIELD laws in New York. But he was still railroaded. Under Trump and what he's trying to do by killing this bill, though it's very possible if Trump were president and was pushing this, that DOJ, FBI could have rammed into Stephen Donziger's home and seized his devices. Not only is this dangerous for journalists, but this also has a chilling effect for possible sources and whistleblowers. If you can't guarantee as a reporter to your sources that our communications will be protected, because in many cases, sources are either straddling the line in terms of their business employment or legality to provide confidential documents to reporters, or in some cases, like Daniel Ellsberg, they're technically breaking the law to provide confidential documents on everything from war to communities being poisoned to government corruption. But if Trump is basically trying to kill or completely water down journalist protections all over this country at the federal level, people are human. Sure, some brave sources will say, screw it, I'm willing to go to jail. But some sources might not be if their identities can't be protected. So this has a very serious chilling effect. I'm not talking about the kind of reporting on like, what did Trump tweet today? And a lot of the fluff and bullshit and fear mongering that goes on in the media. But I'm talking about serious reporting, sometimes by the mainstream media on war. The Washington Post, you don't get to credit them often, but I did credit them a few years ago. They did a great investigative story on the boondoggle that was the Afghanistan war. And they got documents from the federal government, the Defense Department, showing and exposing that there was no basis for continuing this war for 20 years. There's very little basis to start it in the first place. That generals had been told by Defense Department suits, mandated spend hundreds of millions of dollars a day in Afghanistan. Doesn't matter on what, just spend the money. A lot of this came from confidential sources, confidential documents that the Washington Post obtained. Well, under Trump, if he gets his way in killing these protections, and it's not just killing this bill, loosening the protections that already exist, which he's openly talked about doing. He wants to strengthen libel and defamation laws, not for, people who are actually defamed, but to go after journalists. This is very scary stuff. And, the F word gets thrown around a lot when it comes to Trump, fascist. But this is actually how real fascists behave in other countries. They completely neuter the free press and then create their own state propaganda. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. This is from an interview I think the head of the Committee to Protect Journalists did on PBS.
Already in the days leading up to the election, Trump issued a host of legal threats against organizations like the New York Times, CBS, and others. We might expect to see more of that in the new Trump administration. Personal legal cases. He's suing, I think, the New York Times and CBS for $10 billion each. Personal legal threats, but also potentially challenges to pieces of legislation that have for decades protected the press against vexatious lawsuits, like the Supreme Court case Sullivan versus New York Times, which allows the press to publish public interest information and be protected from being sued for defamation.
I want to ask you about a more recent piece of legislation. This is the Press Act, which is designed to protect journalists from being surveilled by federal law enforcement, and it would limit the government's ability to make journalists disclose their sources, among other protections. This bill had bipartisan support in the House. Time is now running out for it to be passed in the Senate. Why is this piece of legislation, in your view, so critical? It's
really urgent that we pass this federal shield law. So some states have these federal protections, which essentially means that journalist sources can't be subpoenaed, information from whistleblowers can't be subpoenaed. It's really important that we have that federal shield law to protect journalists at the federal level. We know that Trump is interested in going after whistleblowers, people who leak, and it's absolutely essential that they are protected and that journalist sources are protected and that journalists are allowed to do their job.
So there you go. I mean, bottom line, Trump is on a hunt to, basically plug the leaks, so to speak. He wants to basically threaten, chill, and intimidate anyone in the government or even private industry that might have access to damning information about the government from going after government, from exposing government corruption, from exposing government lies that kill. And I would say the same thing if this was a Democrat doing it. This is not about, Trump's a Republican. Democrats have not been great on press freedoms either. I give you Obama went after whistleblowers too. But let me remind you, it was Trump's Department of Justice who prosecuted Julian Assange. It wasn't Obama's Department of Justice who prosecuted Julian Assange. Trump's DOJ is the ones who did that. Yahoo broke the story, Yahoo News, that Trump's CIA director, Mike Pompeo, had tried and plotted kidnapping and assassinating Julian Assange. That happened under Trump. Of course, Biden's administration continued the persecution against Julian Assange, which thankfully eventually stopped and he was freed. But it was Trump who got that ball started. So he has a track record of going after whistleblowers, journalists, and why this is so alarming. Journalism, actual, real, living, breathing, investigative journalism is already kind of, on a ventilator, is already kind of hooked up and, fleeting pulse. We don't actually have a lot of actual substantive investigative journalism on things that matter in this country. We have a lot of propaganda. We have a lot of infotainment, masses journalism. We have a vast hot take machine, particularly on this platform, even in our own space, in independent media. So the very little left that we have of investigative journalism, we need to protect. I mean, I am a human. I'm willing to take risks, but I don't know if I can't protect sources and you have a autocrat, growing into a fascist, whatever you want to call Trump, who is basically having a war on whistleblowers and journalists. I don't know how many people are going to risk their lives, their families on providing information to me or other actual journalists. So super alarming. I doubt the media is going to cover this that much because they're more focused on Trump's cabinet officials. But if you care about journalism, if you care about us being protected and us being able to provide information to you, if you care about sources being protected, you should care about this, and you should be screaming from the top of your lungs to Trump to stop this attack on freedom, to stop this attack on press freedoms. And if you are MAGA, is this what you signed up for? I hope not. And please support actual investigative journalism. Support us, statuscoup.com/join. You could become a member for as low as $5 a month, statuscoup.com/join.